Hello there. I'm
Hi.
with my dear friend Nan Dash. Nan, thank you for joining me today. Um, I'll let you start a little bit about, we go way back. Why don't you start about how we met and what we've done together, and I'll add to that because there's
Yeah,
a
it must be over 20 years ago we met, and I came to see you. I think somebody introduced you to me, and we met first time. You were running a services company called Karna,
that's
and ever since that we have been. I was part of the Karna board, and we traveled, we talked, we solved for complex problems, met customers. That's the time I was still at Oracle. So briefly, my background is I have been in the valley for 43 years. I can't believe it. 44 years now.
yeah. That's amazing. Well, I'm gonna get to your background in a second because your background is very storied, and I want people to know what an inspiration you've been to me over the years. You're exactly right. We met, we became fast friends very quickly. Um, you joined my board. You and I traveled to customers together. We met with CTOs. We laid out solutions. And then more importantly, we traveled to India together.
Yes.
And you're like me. You have a tremendous technical mind, but you have a very deep interest in spirituality and things beyond that. And you visited some of the projects that I'd been working on the philanthropic side, and we had really a memorable trip. I'll never forget the trip that you and I had back in I wouldn't say the early 2000 knots. Um,
2005.
yes, exactly. And then I think what I also want people to know is that you are somewhat of royalty in Silicon Valley. Not only are you, you know, pioneer in the field of databases, working with the original DB2 team, and then working to become the CTO of Oracle, working with the biggest customers in the world, but I hate to say this, you're being outshone a little bit by your kids. Uh, you have one son who I love dearly, who's a major leading venture capitalist at a tier one firm. You have another son who's an executive at what we would call a tier one software company. And if I remember right, even your wife was doing high tech marketing in Asia, et cetera. So the Dash family basically eats, breathes, and sleeps technology, and I'm so happy I've got to be involved with it over the years.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Um, so absolutely, now let's segue because it's really an exciting time. You know, one of the things that it's great talking to you about is that you and I have both lived kind of major tectonic shifts in technology. You know, we both kind of started our careers back in the enterprise license days where you would do huge deals and they would do it. And then, of course, you know, our friend Mark Benioff and others led the SaaS, which really didn't take off hugely until like the 2010s, where everything was kind of, pay as you go. And that's why I want to talk about that because even some of the biggest SaaS companies that we know still aren't profitable. And I want to get your take on that. And now we're facing this huge shift, the influx of AI. And I know you've been blogging about it pretty prolifically. So let's start with your background at IBM and kind of how you've seen Silicon Valley shift with these different models and these different technologies.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I started the database business actually in the 70s, if you believe it. And the first generation database that IBM had called IMS.
Yeah.
When I started here at Silicon Valley Lab or Santa Teresa Lab, DB2 was starting to be built. That's the new
Yes.
data model from Cord. Dr. Cord, he's a dear friend, no more. He's a pioneer in relational technology, got the Turing Award. And I got involved in building this second generation database at IBM called DB2.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we built that. I built that a couple of years, then came back and I was reading all of IBM's technology strategy, etc.
Yeah.
And I'll come back that I was remembering today that exactly 22 years, 32 years ago, can you believe it? I introduced the phrase data warehouse, which the phrase came from two IBMers, Devlin and Murphy in Ireland. And I was
Right.
going around the world talking about this new concept called data warehouse. And people said, wow,
Yeah, you know what? Well, it's funny. Two things I remember. One is that when we first met and I understood your background, you told me because you were actually working at Oracle at the time, and you said DB2 isn't going anywhere. You said DB2 was going to be around long after we live, and you're
Yeah,
so right because even now, it's morphed a little bit, but even
yeah.
some of the big banks and they still running DB2 on mainframes.
Anyway, after 16 years at IBM, where I was the head of technology strategy, etc., Larry came calling, and for 6 months I kept telling him, no, no, no. Finally, he made an offer as the head of technology at Oracle. And we took Oracle from a billion to 10 in 8 years. Those are the
Yeah.
fantastic years in the 90s.
Yeah.
But again, we all knew this whole evolution, how the world had changed. I mean, I was just thinking, we
Well,
had, when I was at IBM, there was no PC. So we saw PCs coming. I built the database on that. Then
yeah.
came the internet,
Yeah.
then came the web. Then, suddenly, we saw all these revolutions. So, yeah, now,
What I love talking to you, Nan, is because, and by the way, I should point out, your name Jnan comes from the Sanskrit word jnana, which is knowledge. So it's a real treat to every time I talk to you, we get to break that down. But it's funny, things change a lot, but things change the same too. It's always, the names change, and what used to be called one thing is now it's changed in different architectures as they go. And one of the things I want to go through is kind of like as things have shifted, from the core database. Now we have, companies like Snowflake and other companies that are kind of distributed query engines in the cloud. Some of the core stuff has stayed the same. And you mentioned data warehouses. What's happening now with this, because the one thing that we both know, we've seen those titanic shifts from enterprise to cloud computing, and you and I spent a lot of time working with CIOs, CTOs, moving them to the cloud. But now this new frontier, in terms of how AI is shaping everything. And one of the theses we have at Grand Design is about data and data strategy and how you have to have that first, because that's really going to be your competitive advantage as you face these models. Everyone's talking about the models, but they're pretty soon there's going to be models as a service. You're going to have any kind of model that you want, but the real differentiator is the training data that's unique to your business. Let's talk a little bit about how data has
yeah.
been.
So I think it's a good segue. By 2025, IDC says the world will have 175 gigabytes of data. That's like 21 zeros, 10 to the power 21, 175 gigabytes. And 80% of that data is unstructured.
Right.
And 90% of that unstructured data is not analyzed. So imagine so what is unstructured? It's text, social media feeds,
No.
chat streams, images, video, audio, etc. So Andrew Ng, NG, last name, is
Yeah.
an AI pioneer. You know what he said? He said generative AI's clear starting point is to address the vast amount of unstructured data. So when I was at Oracle, I was talking to Larry also. We were saying, Larry, data is the oxygen. I mean, we kept shouting from the rooftop. Nobody would kind of take it seriously.
Right.
Now,
Right.
data is so fundamental. Let me tell you, the GPT, the middle word is P for pre-trained.
Right.
Pre-trained by what? By huge amounts of data,
Yeah.
right? So the
Yeah.
GPT. So I think we have seen the database evolve over the time, but data is the name of the game.
Yeah.
And right now, everybody is hyped up with Chat GPT and all that. And of course, Chat GPT, Gemini, and Elon Musk's Grok.
Yeah.
Chat GPT and Gemini, they 1 trillion words they are using, which is equivalent to 250 English Wikipedias.
Yeah.
I mean, data is a huge challenge. So we are drowning in information but starving for knowledge,
I love that. I
forget
love that.
wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wisdom is far away. So I
100%.
think coming back to AI, the
Yeah.
fundamental issue here is you have three things. You have compute. So no wonder NVIDIA, all the GPU, everybody is
Yep.
riding high. It's
Yep.
expensive, very expensive. The compute is a big challenge. And then data is number two, and then models. But data is the key part of this.
Yeah.
And what we have seen this euphoria, Chat GPT came out last year ago, November end, 100 million users in 2 months.
Yeah.
Just mind boggling what has happened. But I think what is happening here is, how do you deal with unstructured data? And there are fundamentally a lot of gaps that we need to address.
Yeah. Let me take it. You're so right. And it's so interesting how, these models, AI has been around forever. You and I know that it's been around for decades. But what the transformer technology did was it made us be able to talk to these models and having them seem like they're so smart, when in fact, it's just a very complicated way of finding the next word that's probably going to happen with what we're doing. But what it's done is it's basically made content free. And so now people have to see, what is the differentiator? Because if everyone has access to those models, it's not a business differentiator. And one thing that happened to me, Nan, is kind of doing consulting through this AI phase, even before the GPT was really launched, is the business models are kind of like services business models for vendors. We're still trying to figure out the right business models. And one of the things that's near and dear to both your and my heart is open source. And so one of the things I want to talk about, there was a time in the mid 2000s, I ran an open source company called ISC. And the model there was, we were doing domain name server software, and we were the 80% supplier. And the way you made money was you had a support kit. So when people bought it, they needed support, especially for 0-day bugs, et cetera, and do it. But now what's happening with open source, we're seeing it with Databricks and others, is they're taking an open source stack and then they're providing a SaaS layer that's, oh my gosh, I got the hearts going. This is the AI. This is AI that I don't know if we asked for, but we get it. But it's like it's picking up on my movements and doing that. So that was unintentional, but I am sending you love, just so you know. But now the model is, you build that proprietary SaaS layer on top of it, and that's how you charge and to make the money.
Right.
Talk to me a little bit about open source. What's your, open sourcing of models versus open sourcing of these stacks? I want to get into some specific stacks that we at Grand Design are pretty interested in, but I'd love to hear your.
Let me give you a different angle. I mean, continuing with the theme I was giving, is the data is a key part of it, right?
Yeah.
So we saw the open source, MySQL and all that started some time ago. I'm all for open source, because instead of a dozen to 2 dozen developers, you have thousands of developers.
Right.
So you have this amazing resources that can enhance, and we have seen that. Let me tell you one thing. One of the challenges of unstructured data in the generative AI is a new thing is coming up called vector database. So you vectorize, you store, manage this unstructured data by creating a vector embeddings, right? These are like high dimensional vectors. These are mathematical representations of the attributes. So these dimensions could be tens to thousands. So here is an open source database called Milvus, MILVUS.
Okay.
It's efficient, it's a trillions of vector data sets, supports multiple search index. This is happening. Now Meta, which was Facebook,
Right.
created something called FAISS, FAISS. It's efficient, similar search and clustering of dense vectors. On top of FAISS, like going to use a model that's the open source, then a company called Pinecone, it runs on top. It's providing vector database function. So here is a perfect example of taking the open source, the open source platform, enhancing it and putting this layer on top that gives you, that's a price model. You have to pay.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't live on just free. Nobody survives on free stuff.
No, no, you're right, and I'm a big believer in open source too, because it's kind of magical. When you think about how the true open source thing is, people are working on weekends to help move it forward, and I love it. I wish there was I mean, we could give awards out. Meta has been amazing. Google has been good too in terms of releasing technology open source. And then there's companies, maybe you could put Amazon in that category, that kind of are more taking than giving it. But one of the things I wanted to mention to you was that we have recently been really taken by another open source technology that was released by Meta as well about 10 years ago, called PrestoDB. And we're going to be doing a lot of work with them. And basically what we're seeing is that because of its architecture, because it's a distributed SQL query engine, we can dramatically increase performance at some level, but also reduce cost for large enterprise customers compared to, say, a Snowflake architecture, et cetera. And so my belief is that we always want to help the customer. When we work with CIOs, CTOs, we want to make sure they don't have vendor lock-in and we can reduce the cost. And what we're finding is some of these tools are just amazing. Snowflake is just amazing. It was the first cloud-based data warehouse. But what happens is, same thing with AWS, the bills that the enterprise customers are getting are just, they can't even predict them how big they're getting.
Snowflake is a $63 billion company, and
Yeah.
it went IPO in 2020. So now you're looking at 2023. Look at the growth of the company. At IPO time, it was 3.4 billion, right?
Yeah.
So they really, what they did very smartly, they delineated. You are right. Two of the founders were from Oracle, so
Yes.
they separated the storage layer and the compute layer.
Yeah.
The storage layer, they have disk sharing, and the compute layer is shared nothing. So so all they are saying is, look, we can go and grab any kinds of data, and from the whatever, and they transport it to their own data lake. They have their own columnar data structures,
Yeah.
and a source, they moves data from source to Snowflake data lake, and then they have this query on top of it, and this thing took off because it's all cloud based. It runs on all three: AWS, Azure, and GCP.
Yeah.
But I think you are right. They all start in a very humble way,
Right.
and it's like S3 was very cheap. Instead of $100 for storage, you spend only 10 cents, and nobody believed it when they
Yes.
introduced it, right?
Yeah.
Then C2, hey, this is pay as you drink, because you only use as much power. Then it elastic, it moves back and forth.
Yeah.
All this sounds very good, but today the AWS bill for large enterprises are mind-boggling. It's
Yes.
huge cost.
Yes.
So I think there is a huge opportunity. I agree with you. Presto is nothing but distributed SQL.
Right.
And so they couldn't solve the. See, remember there was a period when you have Hadoop and distributed SQL, NoSQL,
Yes.
all these things came,
Yeah.
but they were slow. So Facebook was using Hive, which was a
Right.
precursor to Hadoop. That didn't. So they came up with this distributed query engine called
Yes.
Presto,
Yeah.
and it's to solve a real problem. See,
Yeah.
Google and Facebook, the good thing about them to solve their internal problem.
That's right.
They
Now,
come up
now
with this.
the caveat there is they have scale problems and data problems that
Day
only
one, yeah,
three other companies in the world have.
exactly.
But because it's just a fire hose of data. So they have to resolve these problems. And the benefit when they open source it is companies like mine can take it and then tune it and kind of bring that value down to the next layer of
Yeah.
people
So
that,
if you just for fun, in the history lesson, I was thinking, I wrote a blog sometime saying, if you are a customer, you are
yeah,
so completely confused with the jargons. Look at the jargons:
yeah,
data warehouse, data mart, data mining, data lake or data swamp, Lakehouse, data fabrics, data pipeline, data gravity, data mesh, data, columnar data, vector data, data science, data engineering,
yeah.
data analytics in the cloud, data curation. I mean, this is, if I were a client, I would say, what the hell is all this?
No, you're so right. I actually wrote a blog post about the 8 different data roles that are needed in the industry. One of the things we introduced at Grand Design was a thing called data management as a service.
Right.
So instead of trying to buy all that talent, you need that. You can pay as a service and get the insight and the architecture and the work that you needed. But you're right. Whenever there's that many levels of roles to play, you can tell that there's something structurally wrong with kind of how they are dealing with data in the first place. But you're so right, and the data space, there's now a thing called data intelligence, the data intelligence platform, to use AI to create more semantics in your data. And I do think that, and Amazon actually introduced a service like this at Invent last week in Vegas, when they said we can now take your custom data separate, not use it to train our models, but then retrain or fine tune a model that you want on that, and then it's owned with use. So that's kind of the way that the future is going to go. Is your data that's proprietary to you is going to train the models that you're going to use to do your type of stuff.
And going back to the theme you said, the more we call new, the more it's back to the future.
Yes.
There is no question about it. I mean, when
Yeah.
internet was new, I asked these young kids running around excited. I said, well, simple question. I have a bank account. I take money out of one account and deposit in three accounts.
Yeah.
Who is going to give me the guarantee that this unit of work is going to hold?
That's right.
Because this internet at that time was a stateless entity. There was no state management. They
That's
all
right.
looked at me saying, "What?" I said, guys, come on. We
Yeah.
solved this problem 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
call two-phase commit. There are technologies that does
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the more we think we are making progress, the more, I mean, shared nothing, shared disk, we talked about it long time ago. But
Yeah. Yeah.
right now, the time has come to narrow it down, simplify, and make it optimized to affordable cost. We
Yeah.
cannot go on
Yeah.
hiking cost to people. So I think there is a huge opportunity. I think to business that you are talking about, data management as a service, take these open source layers and then build something on top and then provide the service there so that it brings down the cost. Even Snowflake is expensive now.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're exactly right. But you're so right too. And you kind of define, databases first. I remember when Sybase was the best database company, because I worked on Wall Street initially, and we did a big and we chose Sybase because of their online transaction
Yeah,
processing,
yeah,
all the stuff that you kind of pioneered at IBM. And then people said, "Hey, well, we have another new use for databases that you have to optimize how fast you can write so you can get it right." Let's optimize it how fast we can read. So
yeah.
we can do an out. That was the data warehouse trend, right? And then what you're so right is that now they have a data lake that has all the unstructured data. So they said, okay, let's make a data lakehouse to combine the warehouse with the lakehouse. And what we're seeing is that you're right. There's a lot of terms, but we can simplify and we can make sure that per use case we have the right architecture. And that's kind of what we do is we kind of find the right open source. The reason we're interested, just to go back to Presto for a second, is IBM, your old alma mater, really took an interest into it because when an open source project um, for it to succeed, it really has to have the guy that's the chairman of the steering committee, the people, they really have to have a good plan and a good commitment to it. And we saw that IBM is really, because they're looking for their strategy too, to figure out how they compete with these big, the big, Amazon, Microsoft Azure, and GCP have got they're firmly lodged into the public cloud area where they're driving it. And so there's these other players that are like Oracle, like IBM, that have to now find out where they're going to try and compete. And that's kind of interesting. You and me are both the same. We kind of like to look at these business models and see how these guys are trying to compete and how they're trying to position against each other.
Did you know I wrote a blog that Larry made a first trip to the campus of Microsoft a couple of months ago. I mean, this is like, it's unthinkable because,
I remember one of you told me he used to drive his MiG fighter pilot
yeah,
over.
yeah, yeah. And he looks at the time and the deal he made with Satya is is amazing because Satya said in the last quarterly earning of Microsoft is the big growth in our Azure cloud is because of Oracle. Now Oracle ran the new thing that they had a combined thing. So Oracle OCI, Oracle runs on its private clouds in the clients areas, but
Yeah.
they are now offering it in under Azure directly, executed.
Right, right.
A lot of people who had Azure for other things and users of Oracle suddenly they found an opening that they can use these two combining. So it's win-win. I mean, times are
I
changing.
no, I did. I saw Larry's keynote at Oracle World, and he said two things that were really great. One is exactly what you said about how he is completely buying into this multi-cloud
Yeah,
environment, so you can go seamlessly from Azure to Oracle Cloud with no intervention. Nobody's going to lock you in.
right.
And the second thing he said, which I thought was interesting, I want to get your feedback on. He said that, obviously at Oracle, we have thousands of software projects going on at once. He said, from this day forward, no new project, software development project, will be led by humans.
Hmm.
We will obviously we have some that are already going, but he said all new ones, they have a environment, Apex, will be driven by AI. And he said that means for example, that we won't have security bugs. We won't have because they can cover all the angles. What's
Yeah, I
what's
mean,
your thoughts on the kind of the future of software
yeah,
development?
you have to take the hyperbole out a little bit. I mean, but he's somewhat right because I mean, one of the promises of AI is, you look at code generation, and if it can write 40 to 50% of the code, that's a huge saving, right? It's not
100%.
completely developer free.
Yeah,
Nothing is human free. I mean, even the Chat GPT text itself, there are a lot of hallucination, a lot of wrong information. So a
yeah,
human being has to be involved to make
yeah.
sure these things make sense. So that's why Claude, which is the competitor to Chat GPT from Anthropic, I mean, Claude is talking about responsible AI, talking about, uh, they're emphasizing a lot more
On safety and the
constitutional AI
minimization of that. Yeah, yeah,
security. So they call their stuff is as the AI assistant. I have been playing with it. It's an interesting product, but
yeah.
a lot of that is really even the Microsoft's emphasis is on the developer community. Co-pilots and
Oh,
all that.
absolutely. Yeah, we're reading a lot of stories about how that's kind of changed. You know, everybody's launching a co-pilot now. Well, you know what's so great talking to you, Nan, is that you and I both love about Silicon Valley is it's always reinventing itself. And now we
Absolutely.
have this new complete thrust of innovation, and nobody's figured out the business models exactly yet. And in the B2B space, there's a lot going on. Um, I look forward to, we'll put a link in the thing below about all your blogs where you write amazing articles on LinkedIn. I want to make sure people get to see that. And like I said, it's such a dynamic time. What I'd like to do, we have this forum interview the experts. I'd love to have you on a regular basis because as things change, it's funny. You and I didn't even get a chance to talk about the OpenAI saga, and you and I both know a lot of the players that are involved in that one, and there's so much to talk about. But what I wanted to do is thank you. Our audience is very lucky to have your insight and wisdom. And what we'll do is we'll make sure that on a regular basis, you and I get caught up. And as we start launching our data management as a service to more and more companies, and to kind of build a layer on top of Presto, for example, to replace Snowflake, we'd love to show you the case studies and talk to the customers with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks so much, Nan.